Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. Today's discussion is going to be about growing dogwood trees as a profitable part of your nursery. We think if you're going to grow 5 or 10 plants to start, that the dogwood should probably be one of them, at least in the Northeast where we are. They're a great seller, people love them. There's several varieties you can grow. We primarily grow the white Kusa dogwood. However, for the fall, we do have some pink ordered, and we're going to start growing pink as well, getting a lot of call for that. We have learned that when customers ask for things more than 3 times, we need to start looking into them. So the Kusa dogwood's easy to grow. It's very available. People love them in the yard either as a center focal piece or at the edges of woods. They do really well in dappled sunlight. They're a beautiful tree, and they are relatively easy to grow. And if you'll stay all the way through to the end, we'll kind of tell you a little bit about the profitability of growing them. It's quite good and an excellent cornerstone plant to grow in your nursery. Okay, so the question becomes, how do you grow dogwood trees? So there really are 3 ways. One would be from seeds. We don't do that. We're not talented enough to do that. We've never tried. I guess it's possible to do that. What we do is we buy rooted liners or little tiny dormant dogwood trees that are just rooted but haven't really, maybe they're no more than about a year or 2 old. They're small. When we plant them bare root. They're just going to look like a stick, and we choose to plant them in both 3 and 5 gallon pots, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes. So this is a Kusa dogwood that we planted in the fall of 2022, so not even a year ago. And you can see it's branched out quite a bit on its own. It has not yet been pruned by us, other than we generally nip off the tops when we initially plant them to create a point for them to break out into 2 and to branch out a little bit. And they can end up being a little bit fuller like this and a little bit thinner like that. The reason why we plant them in both 3 and 5 gallon pots is our goal is to sell them as either generally about 3 to 4 foot trees, tall trees, or more in the 5 to 6 foot range. So the smaller ones are going to go in a 3 gallon, and these are trade 3 gallon. They're not really even 3 full gallons. The number 5 containers will get us up to about a 6 or 8 foot tree actually, so 5 to 6 foot will be fine. And we get them in the pots, and we did 100 last fall, so I'll show you what those look like, and then I'm going to show you how to care for them and how to turn them into a profitable plant. Okay, so these are the 100 that we planted last fall. They go from there down to here. During that time, it looks like we've lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's like about 6 or 7 may have been lost. So that went through a pretty tough winter. It was very cold here in December for a brief, about a week. It was horribly cold. That's not too bad. So that's, call it 95% survival rate. And these have grown from maybe about a little 2 foot whip up to about a 3 foot. And where we nipped them all off, they've all branched. They've grown from about a little 2 foot whip up to about a 3 foot tall tree now. And they're beginning to branch out. Where we nipped them off, that's where they branched. And we did that in the fall right when we planted them, so that they would start doing that immediately this spring when they were growing vigorously. We of course potted them and fertilized them. We've been keeping them well watered, and they're doing fantastic. So it's time now to take the next step with them. We want them to become, if you will, a kind of a fuller, almost vase-shaped tree. We don't want them to become long and thin. We want to encourage them to branch out. And the bonus from that is we're going to go ahead and do some pruning today. We'll start to let them, where they've split, we're going to split them off again. And what we're going to be able to do, and this is where the profitability really kind of comes in, is we're going to take some cuttings from them and attempt to root them. I'm not saying we're going to get you know, 2 cuttings per plant, but we may get 100 cuttings that root. So we may not have to buy a lot of our rooted cuttings for Coosa dogwoods now that we're getting started with them and rolling. So that's the good part, and I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So hang on. Okay, so we're going to get really close here, and I'm going to show you how I would go about pruning these. You could see this particular plant is branching out really well. We wanted to keep encouraging it to branch out further, and we'd like to get some cuttings, as I mentioned. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to prune the tree where I want it to branch, and that is not necessarily going to be the spot where I want the cutting from, but it's going to be where I want to encourage the plant to branch. So I want it to branch again here, and so now I've got this large piece, but on this large piece I've got potentially a cutting here. I'm going to take those leaves off down below, and that's the point where it's typically going to root from. I've gone ahead and brought a bucket of water, and I'm going to throw that in my bucket of water. And I'm going to go back and see if I can find any more cuttings that I like. I really like that one. I'm going to take those branches off and trim these leaves a little bit. So you end up with something that looks a little bit like that. And this is all this year's growth, so we know this is pretty fresh. This is the kind of area where it would root from, where these leaf nodes are. And that, I think, has a pretty good chance of rooting. So in the bucket with that one. Same thing here. Take off those leaves, trim, and that's a nice cutting as well. So that's 4 cuttings already from one little piece. We're going to take that one and that one. And so remember, I said I'm not going to keep all of what I cut off from where I want the tree to branch from again. So I'm going to just go ahead and discard that piece. I don't want it. Let's take those leaves off, trim these leaves. Peel those leaves off, trim those leaves. That's a nice little cutting. And so now I've got a tree that we hope is going to branch out further here. We'd like to encourage it to branch out a little bushier as well. So I'm going to go ahead and clip right there as well. I've got myself another cutting. So branch point, and another branch point, yet another cutting, and the same thing here. Now you might say I just butchered this tree, and you might be right. However, I'm not going to sell this tree all too soon. It's going to go through this fall into next spring, maybe be ready for sale by the next fall. And I'm actually going to give it one more pruning. I'm going to prune each tree twice typically before I sell it. But if you could imagine from where we came from, it was beginning to branch. It's now going to branch here, here, here. I'm going to trim those again. They're going to branch, and now we're going to have a nice full tree when we're done. So that process does take a good full 2 years, maybe 2.5, but you end up with a great tree. Now, what am I going to do with this next one? It is a little bit different looking than the one we just worked on. It's already branching out quite a bit more than this one was. It's got some things going on that I don't like and are not going to make for a nice finished tree. So I'm going to prune, and I'm going to tell you why. So starting from the bottom, I don't want this piece down here. I want to have a nice stem at the bottom of my tree starting. So any of these little things that are coming up that I really don't like, I'm going to remove. I don't see anything here that I think that I can root from. So I'm going to discard this completely. Same here. All these little down low pieces I don't really like. I don't want them on the tree. I want a bit of a stem first and then let the tree branch out. But I am going to remove those leaves, trim these back a little bit, and that's going to be something worth trying to root, and we'll see if we can get lucky with that and save it. Now going from here, we've got a tree that's actually branching out quite well. It's a very nice, good and healthy tree. I want it to continue to branch, so I'm going to go ahead and snip it there, and I'm going to save that piece as a cutting. I'm going to snip it there, save that as a cutting. A little snip there. And you know, some of these pieces might not be great, but we'll try that one. And then when I get to the top, it's already nice and full actually, so I'm not going to do too much up here other than encourage some branching by just nipping off these pieces. I don't think that's going to be a cutting. We'll nip that off and we'll try that as a cutting. And incidentally, where this is going to root from is probably where these cells are that are not defined or ready to become leaf or stem cells, but can become root cells. And that's always right at the leaf buds. And that's the spot there where it's probably going to root from, if it's going to root at all. Okay, and then just a little more pruning to promote branching. And I'm finished with that one. And there we go. So you can also take off anything that doesn't look too healthy. So I'm going to snip these off. Okay, as you can guess, now my job's pretty simple. I've just got to go through the other about 90 of these that I have to do and give them all a nice little trim. I'm going to get a bunch of cuttings, which is going to be great. And that whole process should take about, not that long, maybe half an hour. So here we go. Okay, so we have pruned and trimmed up all of our dogwoods, all approximately 90 of them. We've probably got about 100 cuttings at least. I didn't count, but we're going to go ahead and try to see if we can get them to root. So the process, I've cleaned these all up. I've removed the lower branches. I've trimmed back the remaining leaves. They're not that important. All the power from rooting is in the stem and in these leaf nodes here where the cells that are available to make roots are. I'm going to go ahead and drop these in, knock off the water, knock off the excess rooting hormone. You don't need anything, just a little bit. And I've made some little troughs here. I'm going to go ahead and, you need to use a stick and make a little hole. Go ahead and do that. Kind of filling around those as we go. I do like to keep the, our rooting mixture here is about a third peat moss and 2/3 perlite. It's what we use for most rooting nowadays. I do like to keep it a little bit dry while I'm doing this because it makes it a lot easier to get everything in place. I'm going to have to put these in pretty tightly together to get them all in this one tray. But they go in to the dry mix pretty easily. And if you make a little trough, you can kind of cover them up as you go. If you want to get really particular, you know, the leaf bud on this one is right about here, and there's another one here, but you want to get both of those into the soil mix, and you want to get a little bit of hormone on all of that. So in this case, you know, you might take a stick and poke a hole and get that all the way in. Okay, so I'm just going to keep continuing on here. Until I've done them all. This doesn't take a long time. Nor is it particularly hard. All right, so our final step here is to give these things a nice little mist. As I mentioned, I put them into somewhat dry soil medium, and I do not have holes in the bottom of these containers, but I do have small holes in the sides, and these are to allow a little bit of air to circulate around at that level right when the soil meets the plant. You want to be careful, if you can avoid it, having any leaves touching the soil. That's when bacteria will grow, and you can run into some trouble. So if you have any that are a little bit too deep, pull them up, try to get them out of that soil. This kind of begins that debate of whether you should use a stick to create a hole, or if your rootings should be stiff enough to be able to just push them through dry soil medium like this, and that debate will go on forever. But you can check them. We're going to give them a good water, and make sure our soil mix is pretty evenly wet. Wash all that leaves off, and that's going to be perfect. Now, final step would be to cover these, and because we have those little holes in the sides, we are going to have to open these up periodically and just make sure that they're staying moist. They should stay moist in the upper area above the soil in a container like this with the holes in the side, but you want to check every week or two. But you don't have to check every day. They don't have to be under mist. These are just going to root in about 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll get back to you and let you know how we did. We didn't end up with 100 cuttings. We ended up with about 80, so that's great. We did want to prune our trees. That was the #1 priority. Getting some cuttings was just a bonus. To wrap this up, we're going to show you just 3 trees that are just about ready to be sold. We've got a little 2-footer here that needs a little pruning for this year. Probably let that one grow out another year until it becomes about this size. This one here is about a 3 to 4 footer. I'm going to give that a little trim and probably sell that this fall. And here's more like a 6-footer. It's pretty nicely branched out. Probably give it a light pruning this year. And that's pretty much ready to sell this fall or this spring. Okay, so we're talking about starting with a liner that costs us $2, a pot that costs $1, some soil, some fertilizer, and a little bit of time and effort, and 2 or 3 years growing time total. We can produce plants that are around this 2-foot size, which we really don't sell them this small, but we could, probably for $15 to $20 in our market. A plant that's getting to be a 3 to 4 footer, after I prune this back a little bit, we'll call it a 3-footer, but it's getting pretty nicely branched out. It's a good looking tree. $30, $35, same $4 in it. Something that's been growing with us for about 5 years now, that started out much smaller as just a rooted liner. Now getting up into the 5 to 6 foot range. Garden center is going to get it quite a bit more, but we're going to get $50 to $60 for a tree like that. Again, all with the same $4 investment, and then the difference here is time. As I said, we start out with either number 3 or number 5 gallon pot sizes, depending on how big we plan to grow them to. We can get up to this size in the 5. We can easily get to the 3 to 4 footer in a 3 gallon, although 5's better. So we probably plant about 50-50 or 60-40 3 and 5 gallon pots. So there's a great return there. Whether we get any of the rootings to root doesn't really matter, because the basic math is to buy the rooted liner, plant those out, put some in every spring or every fall, and then every 2 to 3 years you've got a crop. You let some of them get bigger, make a little more money on them. What's nice about plants is especially trees, if you don't sell them one year, they get bigger next year and you sell them for more money. So that about wraps it up. Don't forget to like and to subscribe to our channel. We love doing these videos for you, and we'll see you on the next one as we continue propagating through the summer. Thanks.